Red and blue light tore through the dark, like a warning nobody wanted to hear. A federal director, a trembling gun barrel pressed to her skull, and a deputy who had absolutely no idea whose life he was about to destroy, his own. The night swallowed Route 84 whole, that long gray ribbon of asphalt cutting through the pine flats outside Millbrook Hollow, Alabama. No streetlights, no other cars, just the hush of insects in the ditch grass and the low hum of a rented silver Ford Fusion rolling steady at 54 miles an hour. Behind the wheel sat Renata Okafor, 46 years old. Recently confirmed as the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Public Integrity's Anti-Corruption Division, a job title so long that most people just called her the director and left it at that. Her days were spent taking apart criminal networks that had learned to hide behind badges, behind gavels, behind polite Southern smiles. Tonight, though, she was simply a tired woman in a charcoal blazer, driving herself back from a closed-door briefing in Birmingham, because she liked the silence. She liked being able to think without an aide chattering in the passenger seat. Her government phone, black, reinforced, the kind that could survive being run over by a truck, sat quietly beside her leather case. She was 22 miles from her hotel. She was doing the speed limit exactly. She always did. Renata Okafor did not go looking for trouble. But on a night like this, in a county like this, trouble sometimes came looking for her. The light hit her mirror like a slap, red, blue, blinding and sudden. She checked her speedometer, out of instinct. 54. She eased onto the shoulder with the calm precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times, someone who had spent decades training her nervous system to treat panic as just another data point to be managed, not felt. Hands at 10 and 2, windowed down, engine idling. In her side mirror, she watched a heavy-set silhouette climb out of a marked Millbrook County Sheriff's cruiser. He didn't rush toward her. He unclipped a long steel flashlight from his belt and let it tap, tap, tap against his thigh as he walked. Slow, deliberate, a man who wanted her to feel every second of his approach. His name was Deputy Cole Barnett. 9 years on this stretch of highway, and in his own mind, 9 years of ruling it like a personal kingdom. There was a file on Cole Barnett back at the department, a thick one. 6 internal complaints. Every single one alleging the same pattern: aggressive stops, drawn weapons, minorities pulled over for reasons that evaporated the moment. Anyone asked a follow-up question. Nothing had ever stuck. Nothing had ever cost him a single day of pay. Tonight, his flashlight beam sliced through the dark and landed on the back of a woman's head, and something ugly and automatic switched on behind his eyes. He stopped just behind her door pillar. A tactical position, he'd tell himself later, though it was really just a man positioning himself to loom. He shoved the beam directly into her face. License, registration, insurance, no greeting, no reason given. Just the bark of a man who considered explanations beneath him. Renata squinted against the glare but kept her voice level as still water. "Good evening, officer. The car's a rental. Paperwork's in the glove box. My ID's in my purse on the floor of the passenger side. I'll need to reach for it." Barnett leaned in closer. Chewing tobacco and old coffee rolled off him in a wave. "Whose car is this?" His voice dropped, thick with a manufactured drawl, and he added a word designed to shrink her. "Sweetheart." Something in Renata's jaw tightened, just barely, just for a heartbeat. She hadn't been talked to like that in a professional setting since she was a rookie prosecutor 20 years ago. "As I said, Deputy, it's a rental. I'm the authorized driver. If you'll let me, I can show you the documents." Barnett's flashlight roamed over the inside of the car, her tailored jacket, the clean lines of her blouse, and on her wrist, a vintage watch, gold hands catching the strobe of his own lights. A retirement gift, though he had no way of knowing that, from a federal judge who'd mentored her for a decade. In Barnett's narrow little universe, a woman who looked like her, driving alone at midnight on his highway, did not wear a watch worth more than his yearly salary. Not unless something was wrong. Hands on the wheel, he snapped, and his palm dropped heavy onto the grip of his holstered pistol. Where'd you get the watch? Excuse me? Her tone shifted, not louder, colder, the kind of cold that made grown men in courtrooms stop talking mid-sentence. Deputy, I'd suggest you lower that flashlight and tell me the legal basis for this stop. I ask the questions. He slammed a palm flat against the roof of her car. The bang rolled off into the trees like a gunshot. You crossed the center line back there, and you match a description from a break-in 2 counties over. Step out of the vehicle. I did not cross any center line, Renata said, steady, unshaken. And I strongly recommend you let me show you my identification before this goes any further. Out. Now, the click of the holster snap was almost gentle compared to what came after, the metallic hiss of the pistol clearing leather. Barnett leveled the barrel at her temple, his finger drifting far too close to the trigger for a man who claimed to know what he was doing. Renata looked past the gun and into his eyes. She recognized the signs immediately, the way a doctor recognizes a fever. Dilated pupils, shallow breath, a white knuckle grip that meant his hands weren't fully under his own control anymore. He was terrified, he was furious, and a man who is both of those things with a loaded gun in his hand is the most dangerous kind of man there is. She moved with exaggerated slowness, pulling the door handle with her left hand, stepping out into humid Alabama air that smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Her hands rose to shoulder height on their own. Practiced. Careful, turn around. Barnett stepped back but kept the muzzle trained on her chest. Walk backward, toward my voice. Gravel crunched under her loafers. Deputy, she said, projecting calm over the idle of both engines. My name is Renata Okafor. I'm a federal. Shut your mouth. He grabbed her shoulder and spun her hard, slamming her chest first into the trunk of her own rental. The metal was still warm from the exhaust pipe beneath it. He kicked her feet apart with a boot that left a bruise blooming under her slacks and drove the gun barrel into the small of her back, cold steel against her spine. A reminder, if she'd needed one, of exactly how thin the line was tonight between a bad stop and a body on the news. She rested her cheek against warm metal and said nothing while his hands moved over her, rougher than any pat-down needed to be, deliberately humiliating. Y'all think you can just drive through my county flashing stolen jewelry, Barnett muttered, holstering the gun, only to yank the cuffs free. He wrenched her left wrist behind her back hard enough to pinch a nerve, and the steel ratcheted shut, biting. Deputy Barnett. She read his nameplate in the reflected glare of his own headlights. You have detained me without probable cause. You drew a firearm on an unarmed motorist and used excessive force. Open my purse. You'll find a leather case with a federal shield inside it. I am a director with the Bureau of Public Integrity. Barnett laughed. It was an ugly sound. Sure you are. And I'm the governor of Alabama. Let's see this magic badge. He left her cuffed against the trunk and stalked to the open passenger door, grabbed her purse and shook it out onto the hood like he was emptying a trash bag. Lipstick. A phone with a screen far too reinforced to be a normal consumer device, and a leather case that fell open to reveal a gold badge and a federal ID with her photograph, her title in block letters, Direct Bureau of Public Integrity. Barnett stared at it. Something in him, something built over years of never once being questioned, simply refused to let the information land. A woman who looked like her, out here, alone, could not possibly be what the card said she was. It was easier to believe the card was fake. Nice prop, he sneered, tossing the wallet onto the hood, where it slid and stopped against the windshield wiper. You can buy anything online these days. Impersonating a federal officer's a felony, sweetheart. You're going away for a long time. He grabbed her upper arm and marched her toward his cruiser, one hand pressing down hard on the crown of her head as he folded her into the back seat. "Before you put me in that cage," she said quietly, and there was nothing frightened in her eyes at all, only a terrible surgical calm, the look of someone cataloging every mistake he was making for later use. "Look at the phone on the seat. That is a federally issued encrypted device. You do not buy that on the internet. Call your watch commander. Give him my name. I don't need a commander to book a common thief." He shoved her in and slammed the door. Trapped behind the wire mesh and the reinforced plastic, Renata tested the cuffs. Too tight. Blood flow already starting to falter in her fingers. She watched through the mesh as Barnett radioed dispatch, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Dispatch, Unit 6. Female suspect in custody. Hostile resisting in possession of a forged federal badge. Need a tow at marker 16 on Route 84. Copy, Unit 6, the radio crackled back. "Be advised, federal convoy just passed through Millbrook Hollow on 84, heading your direction. Give them room." Barnett frowned and drummed his fingers on the roof of the cruiser. Less than a minute later, the growl of a heavy engine rolled over the highway like distant thunder. A matte black Chevrolet Tahoe blacked out. Bumpers reinforced, screamed around the curve doing well over 80. It hit the brakes hard enough to fill the night with the shriek of anti-lock brakes and a cloud of tire smoke, then swerved onto the shoulder and parked diagonally, blocking both the cruiser and the rental car in one motion. Barnett's hand flew back to his holster on instinct. He drew, leveling the pistol at the driver's door of the Tahoe. "Out of the vehicle! Hands up!" His voice cracked with adrenaline. In his head, this was backup, a gang, a cartel crew, someone coming to spring their own. The door swung open. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped into the strobing light, an FBI-style federal badge clipped at his belt, beside a holstered sidearm, his face carved into a permanent, unreadable scowl. This was Special Agent Desmond Cray, senior operative attached directly to Director Okafor's task force. Cray had a reputation of his own, ruthless with paperwork, allergic to excuses, and famous within the Bureau for having zero patience for local law enforcement who thought a badge meant they answered to no one. He'd been trailing her route the entire drive, unannounced. Standard shadow escort protocol for a director of her rank, following a string of recent indictments that had made her a target for more than one angry organization. Barnett saw the federal badge and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, holstering his own weapon with a relieved grin. "Federal, huh? Man, am I glad to see you." He swaggered toward the Tahoe. "Just bagged myself an impersonator. Rental car, fake badge, lying through her teeth the whole time. Thought you boys were her crew coming to shoot the place up." Cray didn't smile, didn't even nod. His eyes swept the scene in one cold pass. The open doors of the Fusion, the purse contents scattered across the hood, the gold shield glinting under the strobe lights near the wiper blade. Then his gaze slid, slow and terrible, to the back seat of Barnett's cruiser. Through the mesh, the silhouette of a woman, hands cuffed behind her back. A navy blazer, all the color drained out of Desmond Cray's face. He crossed the distance in 3 strides that ate up the gravel, like he wasn't even touching it. "Officer." His voice had dropped to something quiet and lethal, a register that made the cicadas themselves seem to go silent. He pointed one steady finger at the back of the cruiser. "Who is in the back of your car?" "Told you. A suspect. Resisting, carrying fake federal ID. I am going to ask you exactly one more time." Cray stepped in close enough that Barnett had to tilt his head back to hold eye contact. "Who is in the car?" "Some woman. Renata something." Barnett tried to reclaim an inch of his shrinking authority. "Look, buddy, I don't care whose badge you're flashing. This is my jurisdiction. She's my caller." Cray held his stare for 3 long seconds. Then, without breaking it, he reached into his jacket, pulled a universal cuff key from an inside pocket, and walked straight past him. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Barnett grabbed his shoulder. Cray spun with a speed that didn't match his size and knocked the hand away, hard enough to send Barnett stumbling back into the dirt. "Do not touch me," Cray said, eyes blazing. "And you had better pray to whatever you believe in, that she doesn't file federal kidnapping charges before sunrise." He turned his back on the trembling deputy and pulled the rear door open. He leaned in, and something in his posture changed completely. The ice melted into something almost gentle. Director Okafor. His voice carried clean into the night as he reached behind her to release the cuffs. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" Standing in the gravel, watching a federal agent address the woman he had just thrown against a car and dragged into a cage, Cole Barnett felt the floor of his entire world give out beneath him. He hadn't arrested a random woman on a dark highway. He had put a gun to the head of a sitting federal director. The cuffs clicked open. Cray worked them free gently, careful not to scrape the raw skin beneath. Angry red welts stood out on her wrists under the strobing lights, impossible to miss, impossible to explain away. Renata stepped out of the cruiser. She didn't stumble. She didn't rub her wrists or straighten her wrinkled blazer. She simply stood, and something in the way she stood made the whole scene feel smaller around her. "Director Okafor," Cray said, positioning his body between her and Barnett, fury-banked but visible under every word. "Do you need paramedics?" "I'm fine, Agent Cray." Her voice was smooth, low, carrying the hum of a wire with current running through it. She walked toward the front of the cruiser, heels striking the asphalt in a rhythm that felt like a countdown, and stopped 3 feet from Barnett. He swallowed. His throat worked around words that weren't coming easily. "Ma'am? There's been a string of robberies out here. You matched a profile. It was dark and people fake badges all the time. I didn't." She tilted her head a fraction of an inch. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. The stillness in her was worse than any shout could ever be. "Deputy Barnett, you initiated a stop with no probable cause. When I offered you my credentials, you refused to let me present them. You drew a lethal weapon and pointed it at my head. You assaulted me. You detained me unlawfully. You ignored a federally encrypted device sitting in plain view on my passenger seat. And you did all of that not because I matched any profile, but because the moment your light hit the back of my head, you decided what I was, and nothing I said was ever going to change your mind." The sirens arrived before he could answer. 2 more Millbrook County cruisers screaming down the highway, swerving onto the shoulder in a spray of gravel. 4 more deputies spilled out, hands on their weapons, braced for a shootout that was never coming. Among them was Captain Odell Marsh, a 20-year veteran with a graying mustache, and the tired eyes of a man who had learned long ago exactly which fights he didn't want. Marsh took in the scene in one long look. The blacked-out federal SUV, a woman in a torn blazer standing like a queen holding court, and his own deputy looking one heartbeat from being sick on his own boots. "What in the hell is going on out here?" Marsh barked, striding forward, waving his men back before anyone's finger found a trigger. His eyes landed on the badge, glinting on the hood. He knew that seal. Everyone in law enforcement in this state knew that seal. "Captain Marsh, I presume." Renata read the silver bars on his collar without waiting to be introduced. "Yes, ma'am." His eyes flicked from her to Cray's federal credentials and back. "And you are?" "Director Renata Okafor, Federal Bureau of Public Integrity, Anti-Corruption Division." She let that settle before continuing. "Your deputy just committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon under color of law, unlawful imprisonment, and a felony civil rights violation." Marsh turned slowly toward Barnett. "Cole, tell me you did not draw your service weapon on a federal director." "She wouldn't show me her ID, Cap." Barnett's voice cracked, panic finally breaking through the last of his bravado. "She was resisting. It was a high-risk stop. I followed protocol. I swear I." He held a loaded firearm to her temple. "Captain, Cray's voice cut through like a blade. He threw her against the trunk of her own vehicle and cuffed her hard enough to bruise. If I had been 30 seconds later on this stretch of road tonight, in the dark, with no camera running on either of these vehicles, I don't know how this ends, and neither do you. Marsh closed his eyes and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. He'd seen the file. He'd read every one of those 6 complaints and quietly let them gather dust, because Barnett brought in numbers, made arrests, kept the higher-ups happy with statistics that never asked what they'd cost. He had looked away, and the thing he had looked away from had just walked directly up to his own front door, wearing a federal badge. Silence pooled over Route 84, broken only by the static hiss of radios. Marsh opened his eyes and looked at Renata, already trying to salvage what he must have known, deep down, could not be salvaged. "Director Okafor," he began, voice pivoting into something practiced and placating, "I am deeply, deeply sorry for this." Deputy Barnett acted completely outside protocol. "I'll suspend him immediately, pending a full internal review. If you'll let us handle this in-house, I give you my word there will be real consequences." Renata smiled. It did not reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that promised something far worse than paperwork. "Captain Marsh, you seem to be laboring under the impression that this is a personnel matter." She took one measured step closer, and the 20-year veteran held his ground only because retreating would have looked worse. "You do not get to suspend him quietly and let him retire with his pension intact 6 months from now when the noise dies down." This man pointed a loaded weapon at my skull because he believed his badge made him untouchable. He didn't hesitate, not for 1 second, which tells me he has never once had a reason to. That's not one bad apple, Captain. That's an orchard that's been rotting for years, and nobody's been checking. "Director, please. This is one incident. Then the orchard is rotten." She cut him off, flat and final. "Agent Cray." "Yes, Director. Disarm him." Barnett stumbled back a step as Cray advanced. "Cap, you can't let them do this. I'm one of your own. This is our county, Cole. Shut your mouth and hand him the weapon." Marsh's voice cracked with the weight of his own powerlessness. Interfering now meant obstructing a federal officer, and he knew it. Cray didn't wait for compliance. He stripped Barnett's belt in seconds. Sidearm, taser, radio, and passed the pistol to a stunned deputy standing nearby. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "On what charge?" Barnett's voice broke completely, tears finally spilling, more from humiliation than fear now. "You can't arrest a cop for doing his job." "Deprivation of rights under color of law," Cray recited, spinning him and locking his own federal cuffs onto Barnett's wrists with a click that sounded like a door closing on an entire career. "Aggravated assault of a federal officer. Unlawful imprisonment." "I can keep going, but we'll save the rest for the magistrate in Birmingham tomorrow morning." They pressed him against the side of his own cruiser, the exact position, the exact posture he had forced onto her not 20 minutes earlier. Nobody said anything about the symmetry of it. Nobody needed to. Renata walked back to her car and gathered her scattered belongings from the hood. The phone, the lipstick, and finally the gold shield, placing each item back into her purse with the same unhurried precision she'd shown the entire encounter. She turned back to Marsh, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 20 minutes. "Expect a federal audit team at your precinct by 8 tomorrow morning. Captain, we will be reviewing every dashcam file, every arrest report, and every internal complaint filed in this county over the last 10 years. If I find evidence that you protected him, knowingly, or by simply choosing not to look, you will be answering for that too." "Understood, Director." Marsh's voice had nothing left in it. She opened her car door and paused, looking once at Barnett, now sobbing openly in the back of Cray's Tahoe, his career and his freedom, both gone in the space of half an hour. "Deputy Barnett," she said, and for the first time her voice carried something other than ice. something almost like pity, the kind reserved for a man who had built his own cage and only just noticed the door had locked. You looked at me tonight and decided, before I ever said a single word, exactly who I was and exactly what I deserved. You were wrong about the badge, you were wrong about the watch, and you were wrong about me. I hope, wherever you end up, you have a long time to sit with exactly how wrong you were, because that's the only way anything changes. She slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool now, and the quiet of the car felt like a held breath finally released. She rolled up the window, put the Fusion in drive, and pulled smoothly away from the wreckage of flashing lights and shattered certainty behind her. She did not look in the rearview mirror. 3 months later, Cole Barnett stood in a federal courtroom in Birmingham and pleaded guilty to deprivation of rights under color of law. He lost his badge, his pension, and 8 years of his freedom. Captain Marsh resigned before the audit team finished its first week, unable to survive what they found in a decade of buried complaints. Millbrook County Sheriff's Department was placed under federal monitoring for the next 5 years, and on quiet nights, when new deputies came through training in that county, there was a phrase that got passed down, half warning and half confession. That respect isn't something you decide to hand out based on what a person looks like behind a windshield at midnight, because you never actually know, until it's far too late, exactly who you're looking at. Was justice served on Route 84? This story is a work of fiction. But the questions underneath it are not about the assumptions we make in the dark, about the badges we trust blindly, and about what it costs when power gets handed to people who were never taught to question their own certainty. If this one kept you hooked until the very last line, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Renata's shoes, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories like this one are coming.